And good morning again. It's Thursday, 10:45 on Thursday, the 23rd, and we are picking back up in the House Transportation with our Legislative Council and trying to get to a finalizing of our response on the Budget Adjustment Act to get our letter back to the Appropriations Committee. So I guess Damien will update with where we're at with it currently or somewhere close. I asked you to make changes the last time you were here.
Yes, you did. I've got them in here. Well, first for the record, I'm Damien Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. So the caveat on the changes is the committee was not in agreement. So the agreement was I'll draft language and then we can discuss whether to fill in the blanks, delete the language, keep the language, etc. So there was still discussion, I think, when we wrapped up and hadn't reached a full conclusion. So
our portion now is to try to get to that conclusion so we can. The letter has to be done today.
So the new language is under the heading Replenish Incentive Program for new plug-in electric vehicles. I boiled yesterday's discussion down to the incentive program for new plug-in electric vehicles, exhausted all of the state funding made available for fiscal year 2025 in October of last year. Because of this, the committee requests an additional $2 million to be appropriated to the program from the general fund. So $2 million was a number that was thrown out yesterday. That is a placeholder, assuming you want to go forward with this language. And then the other piece just to note is that there were different funding numbers put out last year. But if you'll remember, that wasn't actually new money that was appropriated. That was money remaining in the program. And you gave flexibility to AOT to redistribute that money throughout the different electric vehicle incentive programs, Mileage Smart and so forth.
Would they still have that flexibility through this?
Let me take a look at the underlying bill. I have to check the language, but I think yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I just have a technical thing. You refer to the incentive program for new plug-in electric vehicles.
I think that
Does that encompass Mileage Smart and Replace Your Ride?
does not. So I would have to mention those. That was another question. So
Because there are three separate programs.
yes.
Yeah.
This was my attempt to distill what I had heard discussed yesterday, understanding that there is Replace Your Ride, there is Mileage Smart, and then there is the incentive program for new plug-in electric vehicles. So
in effect, that's what I was trying to get at, is that we want to make sure that the flexibility for them to manage the programs is still available.
yeah.
Unless you're suggesting something different.
No, I was just suggesting that we need to name them all. It wasn't just the one new PEV program. It was for all three. But yes, they have the ability to move money between them. I'm in favor of that.
Representative White?
I just have some clarification. So according to, this is a letter that we all received earlier this week. I think the actual numbers are the PEV incentives, $2.47 million to continue. The Mileage Smart, if we were to continue, 621,000, and the Replace Your Ride, if we were to continue, 462,000. This is in a letter from VPRO, just that came to all of our committee earlier this week.
And
I think, that the amount really, if we want to continue the program as it was going, when it ran out, the amount really depends on how many months before the next budget starts. So I think we're looking at by the time this goes through, you're looking at 2 or 3 months maybe worth of funding necessary to get it to July 1st.
right, that's what my understanding is what you were looking at. Where this number came from was 2.5 to 3 months because by the time this passes through and be able to fund And to get
Started
to,
up the program, right?
to get to the programs plural. That would be the amount that would be able to be put up for basically, maybe part of April, May and June. Okay. Representative Rowland?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I'm assuming that the federal subsidies are still in place, right? Currently, I mean,
7,500.
yes, I
tax.
mean, because they just began their fiscal year. Does anybody know how we coordinate with them on that? I'm just wondering, it seems prudent to me to be aware of that availability and that, how that timeframe coordinates with our provision that could really maximize the use of that money for the intended group, which is, people who need help with the affordability. So, just realizing I don't know that.
So
answer.
the federal funds are there, they've
Yeah.
been there for the last
Right.
couple of years.
Right.
They're not going to be there, but I don't know what the present administration's going to do. So that's there regardless of what we do today.
Right, but we do know that there may be a likelihood that will be clawed back or they'll try or something. But for this foreseeable little time frame, it sounds like this would be a way to really maybe get a few more Vermonters into these vehicles that we're trying to
Lower incomes, they have to qualify.
correct, yeah.
If they had enough income to, they'd have to have enough income to get the tax rebate. If you don't have any income or much income, you're not gonna get $7,500.
That's not true now.
Oh, it's not true now?
Don't need
Change.
tax out.
That's right. You're right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Just trying to, doing more with less here. That's the spirit of what the presentation we just heard.
Anybody else have a particular comment or piece? And turn it over to you, Representative Corcoran.
I guess I'll make a motion to get this set up one way or the other, but I move that we approve the language in front of us with the minor revisions of naming the electric EV programs and also having a caveat on the FY 26 governors recommend that the EV funding is in there. Because we want to make sure it's continuous, which I'm pretty sure it will be, but I asked the chair of appropriations and they will still have the budget in hand, so they will know whether or not that money is going to be in there. So with those two changes, I recommend we approve $2 million for an ask appropriations.
So you just said
Damien,
that.
are you, I just want to make sure he heard that piece if we're going to, or I guess we do. We don't need a second technically at this point, or we could take,
Yeah.
we'll take one and for you there.
Second the motion.
And then I would say to Damien, if he gathered that motion from Representative Corcoran.
I did. Let me just rewording the paragraph. So what I have right now is the incentive programs for efficient vehicles, and then including incentive program for new PEVs, Mileage Smart, and Replace Your Ride exhausted all of the state funding made available for fiscal year 2025 in October of last year. Because of this, the committee requests that an additional $2 million be appropriated to those programs from the general fund. And then should we say in proportion to the amounts authorized in last year's transportation bill?
Contingent upon
the
the-
governor's,
Okay.
continuation of the program.
We don't want to start the
My
program
understanding
for
of that-
2 months and then have it be cut off. It's included.
Our understanding of that, I guess, is that we don't want to start and stop based on
Yeah.
the assessment, right? So we want to get a jump start. The purpose here is to
Get it back.
get it back up and going sooner than what the potential governor's budget recommend would be. And that's what we're trying to accomplish in that then. Okay, Representative Wood?
And can you just clarify, because maybe, was this program funded through the transportation fund or funded through the general fund?
It was It was general fund money is our
ARPA
numbers.
fund.
We can have a comment
Yeah,
from,
general fund, yes. Logan was right back fiscal, it was funded through the general.
I'm not sure if we're gonna put it up on the,
I will in just a second.
okay. Representative McCoy?
Going to once again express that whatever we use here in general fund money will not go to reduce property taxes that we're using general fund money. Any extra money we have is going to go to reduce property taxes. And as I said yesterday, 30% increase over 3 years is just unacceptable to Vermonters. Couple of million here, couple of million here, and then we don't have money to fund education for next year.
Me,
Anybody else?
I can make this bigger for you.
Great.
Whoops, that's. So here's the revised language. I'll just let everyone read it. Does that reflect the motion?
You agree?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay,
Wordsmith, but things like, no,
that's fine, as long as it,
yeah.
the key thing for me is that I think it reflects your intent, but I also want to know that you think it reflects your intent. And that's,
Representative Pound?
Yeah, I was just wondering if that last sentence, the committee requests the additional $2 million be appropriated to those programs from the general fund to, get them started or to restart,
what about for the remainder of fiscal year
Perfect.
2025?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that clarifies that we're not saying,
Contingent.
yeah. So this would continue funding in FY 2025. And you're making this request contingent upon the governor's proposing to continue those programs in fiscal year 2026. So the only other way I can think of to say this is, therefore, the committee requests the additional amounts be appropriated. This request is contingent upon the governor's proposing to continue those programs in fiscal year 2026. That I think would probably be more clear,
Be more clear,
just a little
yeah.
longer.
Thanks, sir.
But does that?
Yeah.
Does committee prefer that approach? Okay.
Any other comments here? I'd like to recognize Patrick Murphy in the back has a comment.
Thank you for the record, Patrick Murphy, agency transportation. If this were to pass, I think we would need just some clarification on which part of the $2 million is going to which program. Because as it is now, you don't appropriate it just generally for existing programs. You appropriate it to an individual program. We have some flexibility then to move between programs, but that's limited to 50% of what the remaining funds are. So we would need more language in here for clarity about where the money was going.
Would you recommend the percentage burn rate for each program, and then we can fund it accordingly to what those percentages are?
We have that.
Oh, we have, so, all right, so hold
Never
on.
mind.
Bill's
that, the Beatberg thing?
And I can just specify by program splitting up the million.
Did it seem a little dark in here?
So it's starting to go to sleep there.
Now that's just the testimony. Sorry, guys. I used to joke in my old committee after lunch that I would use my deepest monotone, just to kind of lull everyone through slow talking and monotone.
Okay, we'd like to hear from another member of the agency.
Thank you.
Candace Alquist, Agent State Transportation, CFO for the record. I 100% agree with Patrick, but would also throw out there if the committee were interested in having this just be one program for all EV incentives, then finance would be amenable to that rather than separate appropriations for each program. We'd still be able to track them separately and report to you on them, but it actually would make it administratively easier for us if we were to have it be one appropriation. A little in the weeds, I know.
All right, so I'm
Trying to think of the implications of that.
So we would have to,
we'll switch down, at the same page.
if you want to do that, we would need to recommend that the language in the transfer language in let me pull it up here. In section 2020 or section 22 of last year's T-bill be amended. And that, so basically we'd have to either repeal that or amend it to provide that the money could be a single appropriation would go to those three programs, and the money could be used based on demand by the agency to provide funding to those three. And then Logan and Chris and I can all work to get that language together with the agency when it goes into the BAA. But that would be an additional piece here, is if you want to recommend that, it will require actually amending last year's Act 148. So
That's, I'm sorry, Representative.
We did something that we allowed the agency leeway in transferring money. If one
Yes.
program wasn't using their funding, then the
Yeah.
agency was allowed to move money.
right,
Can you reference that section of the bill?
that's actually the section that you would need to amend or repeal and replace. So what it does is it says that the secretary can transfer up to 50% of any remaining monies to another incentive program that has less than $500,000 remaining for distribution. And what you would need to do is either, you basically have two options. One is to sort of specify where the money is going. The other is to say, in the alternative, we're saying $2 million, and the agency shall use that money to pay out incentives under all three programs based on demand for those incentives, and the money is not specifically dedicated to any one program. And then we would have to work with AOT to just really dial in that language downstairs in the appropriations committee.
If we were to, my apologies, if we were able to divide the money into and name the three programs and name the amount that we want from three programs, does that avoid amending and appealing and whatnot?
It does. So, I mean, the question is easier drafting or easier administration? And I don't.
We want ease of administration, I suppose, but.
Yeah, so that I can't tell you what the right answer is, but that you basically have two options on the table. One is to recommend the split in funds. The other is to just say, we recommend that it be one pool based on demand. The other thing I did want to raise for you is you've mentioned new PEVs, Mileage Smart, and Replace Your Ride. What about electrify your fleet? Do you also want funding for that, or I'm seeing,
Still money.
or is there still money in there?
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't need to worry about that. I just wanted to check.
And the bike.
Okay, just 1 second, no. Representative Cobb?
So I did some, and I looked for Patrick, I did some quick calculations on some of the numbers you gave us on the last quarterly burn rate. And roughly PEVs were taking 60%, Mileage Smart 25%, and Replace Your Ride 15%. And if those are pretty close, then with the option that's still built in to move money around, I would think that that would just about cover it. And so if they were put in those buckets and you still have the authority to move it around, then you could keep the buckets moving for as long as possible.
Not really, because they can't go below 500,000, so they're not built up enough where I would think that flexibility would be there quite, the
Yeah, not as
same.
much, yeah.
I know what you're saying, but yeah, and I just don't think there'll be enough money. I'm thinking of all those three programs that replaced your ride over the years. That's been a fund we've always lowered it and transferred it to. And it's been the least probably popular of the three, would you say, Patrick?
So, I mean, I think it's changed over time. Where it's become more popular to be able to stack. And likely would become more popular in the coming months with the absence potentially of federal funds, to be able to have a higher incentive. If you're looking to go with the existing language and not to go back and modify Act 148, then I would probably suggest something simple along the lines of giving it up 1.5 million for new PEVs, and then 250,000 for mileage smart, 250,000 for replace your ride, and that would give enough flexibility, I think.
No, that's what I was gonna do, but I gotta revise my amendment, because I was just gonna say $1 million for new PVs and $1 million for miles smart, and just leave out replace your eyes, but you just convinced me that probably won't be too smart. So I guess we just go back to those percentages that.
Or the numbers.
Or the numbers, yeah, the
It's
numbers, yeah,
probably better.
yeah. So, whatever those numbers were.
Before we do that, I will flip to Bert.
Well, I'm in favor of simplifying.
Yeah.
Not revising, and also I believe that road plus your right is a really important component.
Yeah, he just, changed my mind.
You know, I mean, I benefit from it. During, if you have a 10-year-old car, you can turn it in. And then we say that possibly with some of the cars that were flooded, that they didn't have to be 10 years old. So I think it's a good program.
Well, we have a good lesson of nothing's as easy as you'd like to think that it is.
This is
And
just for 2
all of
months.
the rumors about government are true. So I think where we're at then, David, is that if you want to continue to move forward, we've got to get back to our schedule here at some point. If we want to move forward, I guess we are looking for a revision to your amendment.
Yeah, whatever, like I said, I don't have the numbers.
Or-
my head, whatever those
or-
numbers were.
60.
So what's a hard number?
15.
Well, I had percentages, but Patrick, you gave,
I just gave.
yeah, what were those for PEV?
So 1.5 million for new
Yeah.
PEV,
It's really good.
and then just splitting the difference between replace your ride.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go with those.
Just to be clear, we're just voting in this section.
We've already voted on the other two pieces of the letter. We'll take a straw poll on this portion of the letter. And unless there's anything else, we're moving forward to get our response going. Is that where Representative Thomason?
I'd like to add something, not to this portion, but after.
If that'll give Damien a few more minutes to work on the document.
Sure, go ahead and
let's
discuss.
go ahead and- Let's go ahead into where to you.
Okay, sure. And I just want to be clear, what I'm raising is a separate issue than the EV discussion in my perspective. So I wanted to raise for discussion the concerns around Green Mountain Transit's route cuts that have been happening and the possibility of including appropriations or recommendations in our letter to the Appropriations Committee to address those to provide funding to address those cuts in the budget adjustment. So these route cuts that were started at the end of last year, and there's further route cuts that are planned for June of this year. And these cuts are really significantly impacting Vermonters already and will only have further impact on older Vermonters, people with disabilities, people who don't have access to a car or to a driver's license. And so these impacts will be felt by community members who are just trying to get to work, who, older Vermonters who need to get to the doctor, parents or caretakers who are trying to get their kids to childcare, and folks who are just needing to go grocery shopping and get access to kind of basic shops and needs. And it could certainly have an impact on businesses as well in terms of foot traffic in stores and also their workers' ability to get to work. So my understanding is that $1.2 million appropriation would prevent future cuts that are happening. And $1.9 million would both prevent those future cuts and restore services that have already been cut. So I want to raise that for discussion, the possibility of including funding or appropriations in our letter, or at least working with AOT and GMT to find avenues to mitigate the most drastic cuts in this period, before we end this fiscal year and as we're moving into planning for next year, and to work to address the structural issue in the T-bill for next year, so that we can mitigate this type of impact in the future.
Are you looking to make a motion in this piece? Are you looking for a comment piece where we
Throwing it out.
just throwing it out there?
I think for discussion for the committee,
We can start with that for sure. You want to represent that?
Yeah, thank you. I also have concerns about public transit overall, and I would say the first round of cuts were minimal impact to working folks. This next round in June will have much more impact. But I also heard the boss say that they're looking at sort of the holistic view between rural and urban transit, public transit, and, looking potentially for some savings. We'll have to see if they're there. I would expect there would be some response to supporting Green Mountain Transit in some way. I think there's time before these cuts hit to address them in the next fiscal budget. That's what I think. I'd like to, but I'm not sure this is the best approach to doing that, because there's more moving pieces than just provide Green Mountain Transit a 1-year amount of money to keep these going, because it doesn't address what happens the following year. So again, I support it, but I'm not sure a more holistic look at all the public transit would be the best way to address it, I think.
Representative Ward?
and I just have a question, comment question. So in our district, anyway, I haven't heard a lot of concern from our constituents. So, but I would love to hear, if you are seeing specific, routes that have been cut that are affecting your constituents, kind of like what that looks like. So I'm assuming that this is maybe more of an issue with the urban public transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've heard from constituents. I think we, as a committee, heard from another member whose constituents are being impacted by these cuts, or the proposed cuts particularly. And I'll just note that this is a federal funding cliff issue that's hitting our urban service first and will eventually hit our rural service as well. And so there's broader conversation around how do we identify sustainable revenue sources, and also consider reorganization, or how we can best get these services delivered to people who need it with more sustainable funding. So it's something that, I think the concern that I have right now is that these, especially the more drastic cuts, will significantly impact people's lives and ability to get the services and get to where they need to go in this interim period before we're able to identify and work on a longer term plan for how to address this for both rural and urban public transit.
Representative Coyle?
So a few of us have sat on this committee for several years. And 3 years ago, Green Mountain Transit sat right here, asked for $1 million, said they were going to fix the problem. we gave them $1 million. They came back the following year, hadn't fixed the problem yet, did not start charging fares for anyone. We asked to start fares, they didn't start fares, came back again the second year, asked for another $1 million. We gave them the $1 million. Last year, they didn't come to us, they went to House Transportation, Senate Transportation, and asked for the $770,000 because they knew we were not going to give it to them again because they have yet to fix a problem. And I understand your concerns, but they cannot keep coming back to the table with that. It's been 3.5 years and they have not fixed the problem. So I am not willing to give them, we gave them $770,000 additional this current fiscal year. I'm not giving them any more. Fix it, do something, but I cannot take more money to give to a program that somehow cannot manage themselves. Every other busing company is working around and making it work, and it's always Green Mountain Transit that sits in this chair. And I am done. And I was done 3 years ago. I told them not to come back, and they keep coming back. And not only did they come back, this is their second time this fiscal year they're coming back. They're not getting the message. So I'm sorry, but I cannot support this.
What's that? Representative Corcoran?
Yeah, no, I think concur with Representative McCoy. It's this committee has always been a strong supporter and continues to be a strong supporter of public transit. We have been. We've gone out of our way to find money and move things around to help them out. But there does become a point in time where we gotta say, hey, you have to right the ship. You gotta get your affairs in order. It doesn't seem like they got to that point where we feel confident that they've done all that they can do on their end. And just to, continue to throw money at it at this juncture, especially given the fact that the study that just came out with all the moving pieces and the reshuffling of the routes that could be taking place and saving them in the long term needs to be sorted out. So at this point, I would be against adding money or requesting money to the appropriations committee. I mean, if you want to put a line in there, and Ross has, the administration is already doing this. And Ross has made it clear that they're trying to do things on their end, which they continue to do. But I mean, if you want to just put a line in there to, have Ross continue to find potential savings with internally, maybe that'd be as far as I could go. But asking for any new money, I would be against.
Representative Burke?
Yeah, I think, one of the things is they made the routes in response to trying to make it more financially feasible. So it's the unfortunate thing is that people are suffering from this decision, especially low-income people who don't have. So how do we address this? And I understand that the Representative McCoy's concern, and we've all talked about that. Perhaps the best outcome of this discussion is that we're now sort of having a discussion about the crisis, and that we can sort of make a commitment to, as we go through our T-bill and as we go through the preparations process for the budget, because it sounds like, nothing's going to happen until June. I don't know, maybe it would, that maybe, I'm actually interested in looking at the 2023 transportation funding study, and I'm thinking of proposing to look at all these recommendations for tax on delivery vehicles. I was just talking to the chair of Senate Transportation. I said, would you support something like that? And he said, yes. We have Walmarts and all these stores that are paying taxes and hire people, et cetera, and people are paying taxes. And then we have Amazon delivering all these, trucks that are eating up our roads. I would like to do something like that. Could we do something, look back at the studies that have been done, the number of studies that have been done, made recommendations, and nothing's really happened with those. And, some of them raise the gas tax. Well, that probably is not going to happen, but I think, we could look at a few options that were presented there as a way to really think about how can we solve this problem so that, and then maybe there's something else with the leadership of the Green Mountain Transit, but so that we can make it so that we're not hurting the most vulnerable people in some of the areas of the state that have a lot of people who are economically vulnerable. And as for Clay's concern about this, bringing this forward, particularly because it's impacting your constituents probably more than anybody else in this city.
Okay, is that Ann or are you again?
Yeah, I've lost some.
Representative Thompson, if you'd like to speak again.
Yeah, well, I appreciate all the concerns and feedback shared, and I know this is an issue with a lot of history and a lot of work that we have yet to do to sort of figure out how we don't keep having these conversations every year or multiple times a year. Certainly understand and sympathetic to that. I appreciated Representative Corcoran's suggestion that we perhaps include a line in the letter to the effect of really requesting or encouraging Ross and the team at AOT to work to identify ways to mitigate the more drastic cuts as we work on this longer, medium to long-term solution, so that the perhaps challenges with management or other issues, while they need to be addressed, hopefully we can prevent those issues from impacting the people who were responsible for serving in the short term. So that's what I would, I guess, move at this time. If there's not further discussion.
Does anybody else have any opinions or comments on that piece? I'm not certain exactly where we would be at with the Budget Adjustment Act letter response. I don't know, Patrick, if the agency would want to comment on anything that they've heard. If there were a move to add a line regarding, we did adjust the schedule. I did want to step back at least a second and say we did adjust the schedule pretty heavily this week from our education piece, getting ready for the budget address, to hear testimony on the electric vehicle incentive programs and where we were at, and also did some work there. And then we went and also dug into, and at least were advised and understood that the agency is taking a pretty significant look at transit overall and the rural and urban issues. And we heard pretty extensively from that piece. So the committee, I think, has been responsive to the issues that are out for the Budget Adjustment Act. If that is a direction that you want to go, we have to have, like, we needed a little more impact from or opinion from the agency on that statement. We would need to get a letter or like get the wording of what that would be. And we'd have to hear what the agency's opinion on that before we put it in or before we were to finalize it. So we got two potential issues.
Well,
Both of them.
that particular issue, perhaps it could be a separate letter to the agency, not incorporated in the BAA, because it really doesn't. Yeah, it's not gonna affect the BAA.
Well, it's not gonna, I mean, I guess it's more of a statement, and that's what
Right, I mean.
Representative Thomason wants. And like I said, I'm not opposed to that, but I guess, if you're looking for language, I would just say the House Trans Committee recommends, or no, directs the agency to look for potential internal savings within the public transit budget to mitigate future cuts on the public transit service, something like that.
For this fiscal year.
For this,
Yeah.
I'm not a wordsmith, but maybe you can take my jumblings and I think that would be the.
And I would respond to the piece that, sympathetic to where you're going. I thought that we heard pretty clearly in the testimony from the agency that they were doing this, and that's why we also heard the testimony from the consultant saying that they are going down this path pretty significantly, and they are down there.
So that's why it's not gonna hurt. It's more about making the general public aware that, yes, we're on this. I mean, they don't know what Ross is. It's just more of a piece to put out there that people can point to and say, yes, you know, we didn't ignore it, we didn't turn a blind eye. You know, we were trying to do things internally. It's, you know, it's a, I'm not gonna say a feel good piece, but it's something that we could point to.
So just to put it out there, as the committee's wordsmith, I think what I'm hearing is the committee examined and discussed funding shortfalls in public transit, and heard testimony from the agency that the agency is examining ways to address those shortfalls within the existing budget. I'm getting that correct. I wasn't here for the testimony. While the committee does not have a recommendation for changing funding at this time, the committee feels strongly that the agency or strongly encourages the agency to continue pursuing those avenues to address the funding shortfalls within the existing budget and to find a sustainable funding path going forward or something like that.
With concern for the people impacted, maybe.
Yeah, hold on, we gotta be recognized and we gotta go. Okay, so if we want to go in that direction, it's 11:30 already. The clock is ticking on moving that. We've already pushed back the agenda on the other pieces. I would then say that at this point, we're going to have to move on the piece that the motion, if you're set to go on the motion part, we're gonna have to drop this piece for right now. We'll go back to the straw poll on the other part, and if you want to wordsmith this and put it together, we will find another block of 15 minutes right before lunch or right after, depending on what Patrick does, and act on that, because we are moving on. We have to respond and it has to be done today. So we're not going to do that wordsmithing on this level of time. It's all there. So if you have feedback on it and you want to get together and work with Damien quickly, right after lunch, we will finish this piece and go forward then. But we have to finish the other part and we have to move on this, and we're not going to take up the rest of the committee time to draft it. If there's anybody that has a strong feeling about whether we do or don't want to put that energy in, they'll have the chance to comment on it. And we'll straw poll that as a separate item. So we need to push this one on and move on to the agenda. You'll have a little bit of time to figure out your wordsmith on that, and we'll act on that, and we'll keep the time frame on that. Very limited, but we're well past where we're at. But I'm not saying that we'll do that, but let's get back and finish this. If you want to wordsmith on something on that and add it in, we'll do it immediately after lunch.
So this is the updated language here, the incentive programs for efficient vehicles, exhausted all of the state funding made available for fiscal year 2025 in October of last year. Therefore, the committee requests that the following additional amounts be appropriated to those programs from the general fund for the remainder of fiscal year 2025. $1.5 million to the incentive program for new PEVs, $250,000 to Mileage Smart, and $250,000 to Replace Your Ride. This request is contingent upon the governor's proposing to continue those programs in fiscal year 2026.
Started showing so abruptly. What do we think about this? Anybody have any further comments that they'd like to make? Okay, if we want to include it, we've already done the other portions, correct?
Everything else has been voted on and reviewed.
We'll have a, minus any further discussion, we'll have a straw poll on this particular piece. All those in favor of including this in the budget adjustment act, letter response to appropriations, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those opposed? Okay, we're going to include this language in our letter response to appropriations.
Okay. For those of you who want to wordsmith other language, just let me know and I can meet with you at lunch. Thank you for your time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's patience in moving through the pieces and more to it than there was. And also, I guess I would add that, Patrick, if you're possible, that you'll be able to make available to comment on any language that's drafted beforehand. So unless anyone else has any pieces from the agency real quick, I think we're up for our next piece. We'll at least get some highlights of kind of continuing where we were right after our economist presentation. Now we're going to sort of touch on, we won't be able to get all in depth on it, touch on the transportation funding study that was required as part of the previous T-bill that was passed. And Patrick Murphy is going to give us some ideas on some of the highlights of what transportation funding study on a high level kind of found. And then we're going to pick up with this morning's testimony and this piece and a little bit from our JFO. We'll have some committee discussion tomorrow about the long-term ideas that we're hearing about. So that's my stretch as Patrick is ready to take over in the chair, in the witness chair, and we'll go from there. And thank you for your patience and your input this morning as we work through.
Of course. For the record, Patrick Murphy, Agency of Transportation. Let's sign in here. So thanks for having me here. As the chair mentioned, this is a presentation on the funding study that the legislature required of the agency in last year's transportation bill, looking to refresh prior efforts that had been done in 2013 and then again in 2016. I'll just start by making a couple notes that, you know, we looked at, this is language directly from that section 35. So we looked at what are the current funding levels, analyzed future trends, chief among them is inflation, but other things that the committees wanted us to look at, exploring new funding approaches, and then evaluating how the mileage-based user fee proposal, which is something that we are actively working on, would fit some of these other particular funding mechanisms. And then developing some rough revenue generation projections for these different items. So it's important to note this is a study. It's not a budgetary document. It's trying to give the committee a sense of sort of the order of magnitude of both what our needs are and needs as defined as sort of the core transportation services that we provide. It's looking at those unconstrained by any particular budget or staffing resources and that kind of thing. So it's to give you a sense of what is out there for need into the future, and then to give again a general sense of what might be raised to fill the gaps that are presented by this. There are two other studies that were authorized in the past year, were concurrent to this. There was a study on sort of charging for various things within the right-of-way utilities, for example, and then the cap and invest study was, I think, in section 33, looking at what our climate needs are, which includes transportation, but goes beyond that, of course, and how cap and invest system might raise the revenue to meet those. So it's important to note that because that was a substantial study that was also done, and to avoid overlap, we didn't consider those needs within this with this effort. So we did model this study off of the efforts in 2013 and 2016. So we began by sort of gathering the various funding studies that are out there in other states, looking at those looking at the funding mechanisms that we had reviewed in prior studies, and then working with various stakeholders, including the chairs, the former chairs of both the Senate and Transportation Committees, making sure that our approach was aligning with what the legislature wanted to see, and then sort of taking the much larger list of potential revenue sources and winnowing those down to what are really most relevant for the state of Vermont. We then worked with our consultant, CDM Smith, and the various program managers to get a better sense of what the true transportation needs were for each of the line items that you see in the capital program year to year. And then we took those sort of, the sum of all those transportation needs and looked at what are the gaps right now based on revenue projections. So I already emphasized that these numbers are not, a presentation of our budget. They're just reflective of what we might spend to meet various obligations. So a lot of this, when we talked about, sort of the basic transportation needs, you heard earlier testimony this week and last about the various performance measures that are required by Federal Highways Administration that we need to meet to be able to continue to receive formula funds. So this is, you can see, looking out 10 years, what the potential funding gap is. This is not unusual for a transportation funding study to see significant gaps like this. The first 2013 study that this is based on had a gap of roughly 250 million per year. At that time, the budget was around 400 million, so there's an estimated need of about 750, and that's where the gap was at that point. Much has changed since then, but there's still, of course, a gap. 2013 was the last time the legislature modified the gas tax. This gives you a sense of where fuel consumption has been over the past almost 20 years. You can see a noticeable dip during the pandemic, but it's been decreasing over time as the fuel efficiency of the fleet has increased. But then in more recent years with EV adoption, we're seeing that even accelerate more. I don't know if I assume that Logan has provided some rundown of the sort of overall picture of where transportation funding sources come from, but this is just here for reference. Vehicle purchase and use tax has, as we'll see in the next slide, taken on increasing importance for the transportation fund. That's 6% tax on vehicle sales, and 2/3 of which go to the transportation fund. And then DMV fees, which were recently raised in the last couple of years. And other revenues is a smaller bucket of funds. And then federal funding, of course, takes up the majority of our funding, over roughly 54%. And that can fluctuate year to year, depending on, what grants we might be awarded, competitive grants we might be awarded for various projects. Yes, here you can see it's expressing transportation fund revenues as a percentage of the whole. So a definite decline in gas and diesel taxes. At the same time that the share of purchase and use tax has increased. This chart is to give a sense of what is the sort of makeup of that decline in the fuel tax. And what it doesn't show is sort of this historical losses that we've seen since 2013 and before, but it does demonstrate that electrification, if we're to really meet our EV goals in targets over the next several years, we're going to see the biggest losses from that. And that is why the agency is actively working on a miles-based user fee for battery electric vehicles, because that's where the majority of losses will come from. But that's not always been the case. It's the majority in years past has been because of fuel efficiency, and that will continue, although possibly at a slower rate given the changes in the administration. But those are shown in the navy blue at the top. So when we went to look at the various revenue options, we approached them first with some guiding principles that, again, refer back to what was done in the 2013 and 2016 studies. But it was looking at the revenue potential of any mechanism. So the extent to which a mechanism is capable of generating significant revenue, but also looking at its sustainability. So whether it adjusts over time or whether it declines. You'll see some charts later that show even if we index the gas tax or the diesel tax, you'll still see the same dynamic at play where increasing fuel efficiency will sort of decrease the benefit of that over time. Looking at revenue flexibility and how funding can be directed to meet various needs. And then appropriateness for state level implementation just refers not to the appropriateness of the policy itself, but whether the state is the right entity to be able to administer that revenue. And then the ease and cost of implementation is straightforward. And promotion of efficient use is looking at how the revenue mechanism might influence particular behaviors within the transportation system, the use of our infrastructure. And then, of course, consistency with our agency state goals, and how each of these mechanisms impact people in different ways and different parties, both across race, socioeconomic status, and geographic location. So we looked at a range of these different mechanisms and attempted to, this is not scientific, but attempted to sort of assign a value to how closely these mechanisms align with the goals that we set out for them. And so I'll leave this here. We can refer back to it. It is, somewhat subjective, but our rationale is laid out in the report that was filed a couple of weeks ago, I guess. I'll just run through, I know we're tight for time. I'll run through quickly each of the different mechanisms, and then if there's questions that pop up, feel free to raise those. So gas tax indexing is just, there can be various indices. So it's In many cases, it's to inflation. Some will do it to a CPI. The Consumer Price Index, or other states will do it to their own state inflation rate. And as I said before, it's, you know, it suffers from the same sort of drawback of the gas tax generally, where it will erode over time as fuel efficiency increases. And then it has different impacts on folks situated, whether it's geographically or income wise. Diesel tax is similar, but different in that it has a larger impact on commercial enterprises, so not quite the same impact in terms of equity. You know, the demand for diesel tends to be more static than say the gas tax. And there are very few vehicle models that are out there at this point. The charging infrastructure is not there. So electrification of medium and heavy duty vehicles for freight is not as much a factor as we see in the light duty segment. For the mileage-based user fee for light duty electric vehicles, we did receive a Federal Highways Administration grant in November to be able to implement this, which was for $3 million. It's something that the legislature in Act 62 of 2023 gave us direction to work towards a mileage-based user fee. And so that's work that will continue into this next year, and we expect to have some statutory language for you all to consider as we move towards implementation. That grant funding was much delayed from when it was first authorized in 2021. So originally in the Act 62, we had said implementation date of July 1st, 2025. And that is more likely to be 2026 at the earliest. So it does have, you know, good revenue potential. It does have good revenue flexibility, but also sustainability, because it can be adjusted over time with inflation. It can incorporate, depending on policy choices, it can incorporate administrative costs that tend to be higher than the gas tax. But there's a lot of promise there, especially over the next several years, as we would expect to see millions of dollars in losses to gas tax revenue due to electrification. We looked at the same for medium and heavy duty vehicles, just focusing on electric vehicles, because that is the group that is not paying into you know, the transportation fund for the use of our infrastructure. So we modeled just what it would look like to be able to apply a mileage-based user fee there. And that would be premised on implementing this successfully for light-duty vehicles, and then being able to kind of build out another module within our existing IT infrastructure, which was a critical piece for us being able to even consider a mileage-based user fee in the first place. The $50 million or so investment that the legislature made in upgrading DMV's core IT systems makes this possible and more cost-effective to be able to pursue. There's reference to this earlier in your discussion for retail delivery fees. There are 3 states, Colorado, Minnesota, and Washington, that have some form of this. And again, it's various policy choices can be made around it to have something that fits for Vermont. But for the purposes of modeling, we assumed a 30% flat fee on packages delivered, and then we assumed some number of packages per population based on the other data that we have from those states, Colorado, Minnesota, and Washington. So there can be exemptions, for example, for businesses with $1 million or less in revenue. There's other ways of putting together a proposal. Transportation network company fees is one that folks in the legislature wanted us to look at. Being a rural state where it's really not as relevant except to places within Chittenden County, particularly Burlington, Winooski. It doesn't have as high a revenue potential. What we modeled was an assumption of 3% tax per trip, not as a fixed amount, because if you apply a fixed amount, you're not sort of allowing that to grow with inflation, and you're not maybe capturing the full impact of the vehicles traveling within the state. So if we have longer trips because we're a more rural place, having just a straight fixed fee, as I believe Massachusetts does, wouldn't be quite the best fit for this state. There are also other considerations about just what the availability of the service would be. But as you can see, not a huge amount of revenue. There's only one state, Oregon, that has a mileage-based sort of fuel efficiency-based registration fee. So in an attempt to account for the difference between what the average fossil fuel vehicle would pay and what a more highly efficient vehicle would pay, say a conventional hybrid, if you're getting 60 miles or 50 miles to the gallon versus 25 miles to the gallon for the average car, it would index the registration fee to be higher to attempt to account for that additional impact that's not included in the gas tax revenue. So as the more fuel efficient the vehicle, the higher the registration fee. Only Oregon does that, and then there's some concern about just the impacts to vehicle owners, where any kind of flat fee is going to be regressive.
Representative Coy, quickly.
So is this based on an average, like for every car, you're gonna assume they do 12,000 miles a year? Or is it going to be what that car traveled in that particular year?
So because it's a registration fee, it has to be based on an average. Yeah, and that's and it's taking the EPA's fuel rating at the time that as a new car.
Right.
The mileage ratings change over time.
Right.
Vehicles get, for the most part, vehicles that aren't electric vehicles get less
Correct.
fuel efficient. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last measure we looked at is tire fees. There are plenty of states that have these. Typically, they're not necessarily directed towards the transportation fund. The purpose of these is to encourage recycling of tires and cleanup funds, something of that nature, to deal with the impacts that the tires have. They're not necessarily well suited to completely capture the wear and tear on roads, and there's questions that are then raised that of unintended consequences that creating, depending on how high a level of tax you assign to tires, does the response to that become people replacing tires less often and therefore having more dangerous vehicles on the road. It's not in sort of relatively to a lot of the other measures here, it's not as high up in revenue generated. So those are just some particular challenges to consider. We also looked at what it would look like for a mileage-based user fee to transition the entire fleet. For what we're currently working on, we've sort of expected that this transition would happen based on our transition itself to electric vehicles. We have some very accelerated goals for transitioning the fleet within the climate action plan. But there's going to be this time lag between now and then where you'll continue to see, it's in that chart a few slides before, where you'll still see a decrease over the next 10 years in revenue due just to increasing fuel efficiency of the gas powered fleet. So we looked at what it might be to actually transition all of these vehicles. Now, this chart starts in 2028, where that might be applied. I think that's probably too aggressive for what the state would be able to do. It will take some time for the state to be able to actually implement a mileage-based user fee for just fully electric vehicles and then consider how that would happen for the rest of the fleet. But this, when you compare the revenue that's coming in from fuel taxes, this gives you a sense of how much more it might be able to take in based on the fee analysis that we've provided in a prior legislative report, February 1st of last year. This is to give you a sense of them all together, where you can see the tax indexing does have declining benefit over time, where a mileage-based user fee has quite a significant increase in the benefit, and some of the others are more modest over time. We also have to sort of consider things like the volatility of the economy. So when there is a downturn and you're relying more and more on the purchasing use tax, you will see a much deeper dive for transportation revenue. And so thinking about, what is the right diversity of sources, mix of sources to be able to ensure that in good times and in bad, you have the revenue needed for the transportation program. So that's the quick summary, and happy to answer questions and follow up.
And we've got some committee time scheduled on Friday to discuss this, what we heard earlier this morning. And thank you for your flexibility in terms of the way this morning's agenda went and for your presentation, and to all the members. And I know there's a lot of people have things to do over lunch, so we are adjourned.